On a single Monday morning, Nvidia watched $250 billion vanish from its market value before lunch. There was no disastrous earnings call, no scandal, no recalled product. The trigger came out of Shanghai news about a cold machine made by a company almost nobody outside the chip industry has ever heard of doing a job most people couldn't explain if you asked them. By the closing bell, ASML, the Dutch firm that has quietly sat atop one of the most important choke points in the global tech supply chain for decades, had shed more than 55 billion euros in value. Samsung and SK Hynix, two of the world's largest memory chip producers, each dropped over 13%. South Korea's stock market briefly froze trading after plunging nearly 11%. AMD slid more than 8%. Micron fell close to 6%. This wasn't a rough day for one stock. This was full-blown panic sweeping across the entire global semiconductor sector within a matter of hours. So what actually triggered it? China had quietly begun producing, in small numbers, the single most critical piece of equipment in modern chip making, the kind of machine that, until very recently, only one company on the planet could reliably build the machine that, in a very real sense, the entire chip industry runs on. To understand why this news caused genuine panic instead of a shrug, you need to understand just how total ASML's grip on this industry has been. Every advanced chip from the processor inside your phone to the AI accelerators running the world's largest data centers starts life as a plain silicon wafer that needs impossibly precise patterns burned into it. We're talking about a scale measured in nanometers, small enough that it's genuinely hard to picture. The machines that carve these patterns, known as lithography systems, rank among the most sophisticated pieces of hardware humans have ever engineered, blending precision optics, laser technology, and mechanical systems into devices that routinely cost well over $100 million apiece. For decades, exactly one company, ASML, headquartered in the Netherlands, has held something close to a total lock on the most advanced tier of this equipment. Not a market lead, and not the top player in a crowded field. An actual functional monopoly on the machines needed to produce the world's most cutting-edge chips. Every major chip maker on Earth, TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung in South Korea, Intel in the United States, has depended entirely on this one company to manufacture its flagship products. And that's exactly why lithography equipment has turned into one of the defining battlegrounds of the broader tech rivalry between Washington and Beijing. Export controls have specifically targeted ASML's most advanced systems, cutting Chinese chip makers off from them for years because controlling access to one company's hardware has proven to be one of the most effective levers available for slowing China's push toward domestic chip independence. Now, here's what changed. On July 27th, reports surfaced that a state-backed group in Shanghai, linked to a Huawei-affiliated equipment maker known as SI Carrier, had begun low-volume manufacturing of its own immersion lithography systems, specifically in the deep ultraviolet or DUV category. The company behind it, Shanghai Yuliangshen Technology, was founded in 2022 with roughly $1 billion in registered capital and has spent the years since working toward exactly this outcome. According to the reports, the plan is to build around 5 of these systems in 2026, scaling to roughly 20 in 2027, with early customers expected to include SMIC, Huahong, and CXMT, 3 of China's most important domestic chip makers. It matters to be precise about what kind of breakthrough this actually is, because the framing changes everything. This is not an EUV machine, the far more advanced category that ASML alone produces and which remains fully blocked from export to China. This is a DUV immersion system, a step down in sophistication, but still genuinely capable of producing meaningfully advanced chips, just not the absolute bleeding edge that EUV enables. Even so, the achievement is real. Building a working, immersion-capable DUV lithography machine domestically with zero reliance on ASML represents a genuine technical milestone, one Chinese toolmakers have been chasing for years, without previously showing this level of actual manufacturing capability. That's why markets reacted the way they did, even though, as we'll get into, there are solid reasons to be cautious about how much this actually ships in the near term. With that, let's walk through exactly how the sell-off unfolded, because the scale of it tells its own story about how sensitive this particular choke point has become. ASML shares dropped more than 8%, hitting their lowest level since early June and sliding to around $1,659. That single session wiped out roughly 55 billion euros from a company that, until that morning, held one of the most secure competitive positions in all of technology. Nvidia, despite having no direct link to ASML's lithography business, fell about 5%, erasing roughly $250 billion as investors reassess the entire chip supply chain Nvidia relies on. The damage spread further. AMD down more than 8%, Micron, the last major American memory chip maker, down close to 6%, Samsung and SK Hynix each down over 13%, SanDisk down roughly 11%, and South Korea's Kospi index sliding nearly 11% at one point, triggering an automatic circuit breaker built specifically to stop panic-driven crashes from spiraling further. That's an extraordinary amount of value wiped out across an entire sector, all triggered by news about a relatively small number of machines that, by the company's own targets, won't hit meaningful volume until 2027. The sheer size of that reaction tells you something on its own. Investors weren't just pricing in 5 machines this year. They were pricing in the psychological jolt of watching ASML's monopoly crack for the first time and trying to work out what that means for the next 5 to 10 years of competitive positioning across the whole chip industry. Now, here's where it's worth slowing down for the honest, fuller picture, because a lot of the coverage leaned hard into the dramatic sell-off without giving enough space to what serious industry analysts are actually saying about the near-term reality. And semiconductor research firm SemiAnalysis, along with CNBC and Reuters Breaking Views, have all since published pieces urging caution about how much this genuinely changes in the short run. The numbers make the gap obvious on their own. ASML currently ships around 130 immersion lithography machines a year, the product of decades of refined manufacturing, deep customer relationships, and proven reliability at massive scale. China's new domestic effort is targeting 5 machines this year, climbing toward maybe 20 next year. That's nowhere close to matching ASML's actual output, even before you factor in questions about performance. And performance is exactly where the biggest uncertainties remain. Analysts are flagging concerns around yield, the share of chips that come out meeting quality standards, throughput, meaning how many wafers the machine can process per hour, and reliability, meaning how consistently it runs without breakdowns over months and years of continuous industrial use. These are precisely the areas where ASML's decades of accumulated engineering experience show up most. And they're notoriously hard to replicate quickly, even once the core technology has been proven to work at all. Reuters Breaking Views specifically described the near-term threat to ASML as overblown, suggesting the market's dramatic one-day reaction significantly overshot the actual near-term business impact. That's a fair caveat, and one worth taking seriously rather than getting swept up entirely in a single chaotic trading session. So if the near-term impact really is this limited, why did markets react with such genuine alarm? This says a lot about how these kinds of strategic tech stories actually move prices. Markets don't just price in what's true today, they price in trajectories and shifts in how a competitive landscape is perceived going forward. For years, ASML's grip on advanced lithography has been treated by investors as close to an unbreakable moat, a genuinely unique edge that justified premium valuations across the whole chip equipment sector. The instant credible evidence emerged that this moat had its first real crack, even a small one, even confined to a less advanced category of machine, investors immediately began rethinking what the next 5 to 10 years might look like. That kind of re-rating where a stock's valuation shifts because assumptions about a company's long-term position have changed tends to produce exactly this kind of outsized one-day move that looks disproportionate to the immediate business impact. It's less about the 5 machines shipping this year and more about what happens if that becomes 50 machines in 3 years or 506, following a trajectory similar to how China's other manufacturing sectors have scaled once they cracked the initial technical barrier. And that pattern, a slow first breakthrough followed by rapid scaling once the core technology is proven, has played out repeatedly across Chinese industries, from solar panels to batteries to shipbuilding. Investors betting on that pattern here aren't necessarily wrong. They're betting on trajectory, not just reading this year's stated targets literally. Whether that bet holds for lithography specifically, given how much harder this technology is to scale compared to those other sectors, remains genuinely open. Zoom out, and this fits a pattern we've seen before. China responding to Western tech restrictions, not by giving up, but by finding an adjacent path forward, even an imperfect one, rather than waiting for full parity before making a move. Blocked from ASML's most advanced EUV machines and facing tightening limits on some DUV equipment too. China's answer has been heavy investment in its own domestic lithography capability, starting with the less advanced but still genuinely useful DUV tier. That's sensible sequencing rather than trying to leap straight to matching ASML's most cutting-edge EUV technology, which remains a considerably harder engineering problem. This also connects to the packaging and chiplet strategies we've discussed before. If China can produce enough of these somewhat less advanced chips domestically and then combine them using advanced packaging techniques like the glass substrate approach we covered recently, that opens a viable path toward competitive AI hardware without needing to match ASML's top-tier equipment at all. At least not soon. It's a multi-front push: lithography, packaging, and materials innovation, advancing somewhat independently, but reinforcing each other toward the same broader goal of cutting dependency on equipment the West controls. It's worth noting that Shanghai Yuliangshan isn't working alone here. China's push toward domestic lithography has been building across multiple companies and research institutions at once, with this announcement simply being the most visible, most commercially advanced result to surface publicly so far. Huawei's connection to the effort through SI Carrier matters, given the company's broader role in China's self-sufficiency push over recent years. Huawei has already shown it can develop advanced chip design capability domestically, notably with its own AI accelerator chips, despite years of tightening export restrictions. That track record suggests a company with real experience navigating around restrictions through sustained, well-funded internal development rather than simply waiting for rules to loosen. Beyond Huawei's orbit, several Chinese universities and state research institutions have published papers over recent years detailing progress on lithography subcomponents, precision optics, laser light sources, the extremely sensitive positioning systems needed to align a wafer with nanometer accuracy during exposure. Much of that work moved quietly without generating headlines, but it forms the broader base of technical knowledge that made a moment like this possible at all. Genuine industrial breakthroughs rarely come from one company working in total isolation. They tend to emerge from an entire ecosystem of research labs, component suppliers, and manufacturers advancing in parallel, occasionally converging into one visible milestone that grabs everyone's attention at once, exactly as this one has. There's a second-order question we're sitting with, too. How might this shape future export control decisions in Washington and Brussels? Restrictions on lithography gear have historically been calibrated around a specific logic block, the most advanced tools, while sometimes permitting sales of less advanced equipment on the theory that some commercial relationship still serves broader diplomatic and economic interests while the true cutting edge stays locked down. A credible domestic Chinese alternative at the DUV tier, even an imperfect one, could shift that calculus if Chinese chipmakers increasingly have a viable, if less capable, domestic DUV option. The old argument for preserving even limited access to that tier of Western equipment as leverage gets weaker. This could cut either way, and it's genuinely hard to call which way policymakers lean. One camp argues restrictions on remaining categories could actually tighten further, since once China proves independent capability at one tier, officials may feel freer to lock down everything else. The diplomatic cost no longer buys the same commercial leverage it once did. The opposite camp argues restrictions might ease. Instead, on the theory that policymakers recognize the controls are increasingly failing to prevent domestic development and are simply accelerating it, the very dynamic that produced this breakthrough in the first place. Whichever direction policy actually moves, this announcement will likely factor into those conversations in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo in the months ahead, since it offers concrete, verifiable evidence of how effective current restrictions have actually been, rather than remaining a purely theoretical debate. Here's my honest take after digging through both the dramatic headlines and the more measured analyst commentary that followed. I think Monday's reaction genuinely overshot the near-term business reality. 5 machines this year, scaling to 20 next, against ASML's roughly 130 annual shipments, simply isn't a business-threatening shift in the immediate term. And the yield and reliability concerns analysts have raised are legitimate, not just defensive spin from a threatened incumbent. At the same time, I don't think this is meaningless either. It's a genuine technical milestone, the kind of proof of concept moment that has historically preceded much faster scaling in other Chinese manufacturing sectors once the underlying technology gets proven out in production. What stands out most to me is how clearly this episode shows the gap between market psychology and near-term business reality. Both things can be true at once. ASML's actual business exposure this year is limited, and the strategic significance of its monopoly, showing its first real crack, is genuinely important for how this whole industry gets valued over the next decade. I'd read Monday's stock move as a signal about shifting long-term expectations, not an accurate read on this year's competitive landscape and the next 12 to 18 months of real production data. Will tell us far more than one chaotic trading session ever could. And there's a broader lesson in here, too, worth keeping in mind for the next headline like this one, markets. And honestly, a lot of news coverage generally tend to compress messy, multi-year technology trajectories into single dramatic moments, a crash, a launch, a surprise earnings print, and the reality of how semiconductor manufacturing capability actually develops is almost always slower, messier, and more gradual than any one headline can capture. That doesn't mean these dramatic moments don't matter. Monday's reaction genuinely reflects a real shift in how investors are pricing long-term risk across this sector. But treating any single day's move as the final verdict on a race this complex, this capital-intensive, and this dependent on years of sustained execution is almost always a mistake. So here's what I'd love to know from you. Do you see Monday's reaction as a rational repricing of a genuine long-term threat, or a panicked overreaction to a still unproven, still limited breakthrough? There's a legitimate case on both sides, and I'm genuinely curious where you land. Drop your take in the comments. If you want to keep following how this lithography race plays out, along with everything else happening across China's chip materials, and manufacturing sectors. That's exactly what we cover here every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because between ASML, Nvidia, Samsung, and China's own tool makers all chasing the same prize, this story is only getting started.